The goal of this video is to provide a quick overview of effective ways to approach peer review for this class. If you're like me, you've probably had less than ideal experiences with peer review for a number of reasons, and it's not that the person who was reviewing your writing necessarily was not helpful, but maybe they didn't give you quite the level of feedback you were looking for, or the comments were a little vague in general. So I've put into place a process and a system to help us get to good, effective feedback. And I just want to walk you through some of the things you might think about as you give feedback to your peers and also as you receive feedback from your peers. So we're going to talk about method. I'm going to walk you through how to give feedback on a document and ways to think about that feedback. And then I'll conclude by just having you think about how to respond as a recipient of feedback. So first, the method. You know that I've started you off by having you write a writer's memo. So whenever you submit your drafts to your writing group, you will also accompany it with a writer's memo. And the purpose of this memo is actually to help you outline what it is you need from your reviewers. What I've realized as I've taught for a while, and also as I've received feedback from people sometimes, is that they don't always know what to focus in on. And so it can be a little daunting as a reviewer to think about what it is that you're going to be looking at. So the writer's memo is really helpful here because you can outline maybe the 2 or 3 big things that you're most worried about. What are the concerns that you have currently? What do you feel like you're struggling with that you would benefit from receiving feedback on? So for instance, if you've been trying some new things with your resume and with the document design and you're just not really quite sure how it works because it's fairly new to you, you can ask targeted questions from your reviewers about how they feel about it, what suggestions they might have, or what do they feel about the organization of it, and give them some context and background that would help them make an informed decision and give you some good feedback. So this memo will provide that framework, and then that will also give the reviewer something to focus in on specifically when they start reviewing your documents. So after they do that, then they will read your document, put feedback on the document itself, and then they will in turn write a memo back to you as the writer where they say, or you if you're a reviewer, and you'll write a memo back to the writer that says essentially what you got out of the document, what you saw that was going really well, what questions you had, and what suggestions you have for the writer to improve the document as they're working on it. So that's the sort of big overview of the process. And now let's get into a little bit of what you might think about as you go through the document. So you see here in front of you a letter. It's a cover letter, something that you all will be working on. And what I would recommend first that you do as a reviewer is that you stop, and before you even look at the document, you pull up the memo from the writer and you review what it is that they have said they need help with. So you obviously don't have to restrict your comments just to what they've asked for, but you do indeed want to address the main concerns that they have. So look at what they have concerns about and then use that when you come into the document to make sure that you're addressing those things. So the letter in front of you was sent to me by someone I've worked with in the past, and she essentially wanted feedback about how feasible, or just making her argument about why she's qualified for the job. So she wasn't as concerned with style, for instance. She was mostly concerned about creating an effective argument in order to get an interview for this position. So when you look at my feedback, you can see that I focus primarily on the arguments that she's making. So I know what she's looking for as I read it. The second step would be then to look over the entire document. So as you're reading the entire document, don't make any comments, just read it. And you don't have to read it super detailed, just get a good sense of the document as a whole. And that way, so you don't give feedback early on about something maybe that they address later. So you get a sense of what the entire document contains, and then you can go back and begin providing feedback. So one of the things that I have done is just to make sure that it matches what a cover letter should be. So here I've recommended that she delete her name off the top, because if you're not using a letterhead, you don't include your name and the address, for instance. So just making sure that it meets the expectations of what a cover letter should be. In addition, I point out that perhaps if she could find who the hiring person is for this particular job, that she put their name in there instead, because that's preferable than to the sort of general to whom it may concern. It also helps you make a case that you know who you're writing for. And then from there, I make comments about being more concise with an argument. So this sentence is a little awkward and it doesn't really quite get at exactly what it is that she has that will make her a good candidate for the position. So I encourage her to think about what it is that she might include that would make her a better candidate. So I give her a couple of options as well. So I was like, hey, you could try this or you could try this. And that offering of choices can just be really generative for a writer because they can look at what you've offered and either go a different direction or at least have two options to choose between to make the best case for what they're trying to do. You can also see throughout that I've occasionally deleted things, I've tweaked the style a little bit, but this person overall is a fairly solid writer, and so I didn't want to mess too much with the person's style. If you're in a different position where the argument is pretty strong and the person is just really ready for some style feedback, then you can make a few comments here and there, but try not to get too bogged down as a reviewer in the process of editing. So keep in mind that we're at the revision level here, and so we want to keep our focus on the big stuff. Are they making a clear and compelling argument? Do they have supporting information to back up the argument that they're making? Does the argument make sense? Is it compelling? Does it grab a reader's attention? Does it seem focused on the strengths of the writing? So keep that in mind too. But of course, if you notice like a consistent error or like a kind of weird and awkward phrasing, you can point that out. You can either say, hey, this phrasing is awkward with a comment, or you can offer a suggestion to improve the phrasing. So just keep that in mind as well. One thing I do want to point out here too is that I've not only provided criticism or comments to help make the writing better, but I've also noted where things are effective. And this can be really beneficial to a writer because it helps them understand their strengths and what's going well about the document. So I want to encourage you each to find something that works well and to highlight that as a strength for each writer. So here I point out that this person has a really good transition and it was awesome, so I made a note of it. Later on, I put down that I think that the argument was effective, that she's pointing out that she's changing jobs and she's wanting to point out why, and I thought it was a pretty effective way of demonstrating her interest in changing jobs, which would make her a more compelling candidate to the people reviewing her letter. So, and then I continue on with just different things, and then at the end I sort of have a general comments about maybe how to make the letter shorter since it should be at one page. So that's just a little bit about how I go about giving feedback, or at least in this instance. And hopefully that provides an understanding for you about how you can provide effective feedback yourself. The last thing I want to point out is responding as the writer when you're on the receiving end of feedback. So sometimes it can be tempting to feel like you have to address every single thing a reviewer has pointed out, even when I'm the one, your instructor, giving you that feedback. But keep in mind that feedback is just meant to be a guide. You can reject it, you can look at it and say, well, they have a point, but I don't really like how they've suggested fixing it here, so I'm going to fix it in this way. So just use the feedback as a point of reference when you're revising. It can call out the things that you're struggling with and that you want to work on and build and continue bolstering throughout the semester, but it can also point out where you're strong and what's effective. And I just encourage you to receive feedback with a generous mindset that you're learning, they're learning, everyone's learning. And so if somebody kind of gives you bad feedback, don't dwell on it too long. Just say, okay, like I kind of get why they maybe made this comment. It's a little bit of a misunderstanding, so I'm going to ignore this, but I appreciate that they pointed something out to me here that was actually kind of helpful because it pointed out an awkwardness, for instance, or something like that. So with this video, I hope that it gives you a good sense of how to go about providing feedback to your peers and receiving feedback effectively. You'll have the memos from the reviewers that will also contextualize what you'll be doing. So in the end, I hope that this whole process is a lot more effective and you get really good feedback and you continue to develop as writers throughout the semester.